He was arrested on Thursday, and the shock is still settling over a congregation, a town, and a network of people who looked to their leaders for moral direction. If you want to follow the story as it develops, please hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss future updates. The center of the story is a 24-year-old man, identified by authorities as Jonathan Peternell, who was taken into custody in late October on multiple felony counts alleging possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material. The charges are among the most serious a prosecutor can bring, and they were the product of a sustained investigation that law enforcement says uncovered a substantial volume of illicit images and communications. Court filings show the arrest took place on October 23, and the case has been lodged in the local criminal justice system as detectives and prosecutors prepare for the next steps. For the community, the criminal allegations do more than prompt legal proceedings. They force an anguished reckoning about trust, safety, and the responsibilities of those who shepherd congregations. That reckoning began weeks before the arrest. Investigators executed a search warrant at the Peternell family home on September 10 after receiving a tip that prompted a multi-week probe. According to public records, officers were at the residence on the day of the search, and several electronic devices were seized for forensic examination. Those devices are now central to the state's case. Modern investigations into digital exploitation rely heavily on the careful collection and analysis of phones, computers, and cloud accounts to piece together when files were created, how they were shared, and whether the accused knowingly possessed or distributed illegal content. The execution of the warrant, the seizure of devices, and subsequent forensic work are the standard arc of such investigations, but each step also raises technical questions that defense teams commonly explore in court, from the legality of searches to the chain of custody for digital evidence. What police allege they found during those forensic reviews is both extensive and profoundly troubling. Authorities say investigators uncovered more than 200 files of suspected illicit material across the devices taken from the home. Descriptions in affidavits and reporting indicate some of that content was graphic and in some cases appeared to have been altered or created using artificial intelligence, a fact that has intensified concern about how new technologies are being misused. The alleged volume and variety of files matter legally because they can influence charging decisions, and they matter socially because they shape how the wider community perceives the scope of the alleged conduct. For neighbors and churchgoers, the descriptions of the content have provoked a deep sense of violation and bewilderment, particularly when the alleged material appears to involve fabricated or manipulated images that complicate questions about authorship and authenticity. Among the most painful elements reported by investigators is an allegation that some of the files included images of people close to the accused. Court documents reportedly reference images that appeared to depict the accused parents in explicit contexts. If those claims are substantiated, they introduce additional layers of complexity. Personal boundaries are breached in ways that implicate family privacy and, possibly, additional victims. Investigators will need to establish how any such images were obtained and whether they were genuine photographs or products of manipulation. The emotional consequences for family members in such circumstances are severe, and they alter the legal landscape because investigators must determine whether new offenses, such as image-based abuse or unauthorized recording, should be added to the case. For a congregation that knew these families personally, the idea that the alleged wrongdoing touched people inside a trusted circle creates anguish that goes beyond the courtroom. Technology plays a central and grim role in this case. Authorities say part of the investigation was sparked by a cyber tip that led them to examine claims that the suspect had been uploading illegal content to Snapchat. Prosecutors allege not just possession but distribution. The defendant is accused of sharing material through the platform and participating in a group chat reported to be named Diddy Disciples. The use of ephemeral messaging services and private group chats is a well-known method by which illicit material is circulated, precisely because messages can disappear quickly and participants may assume these platforms offer cover. Yet digital traces often remain, in account records, backups, or on devices, and those traces are what investigators follow. The involvement of a group chat suggests the alleged conduct extended beyond isolated possession to active sharing, which carries distinct legal weight and often leads prosecutors to pursue stiffer penalties. Following the arrest, the accused entered a not guilty plea in initial court proceedings and is scheduled for further hearings as the legal process unfolds. At this early stage, common defense strategies include challenging the legality of searches, disputing evidence handling, and questioning whether files were properly authenticated, especially in a case where some images might have been generated or altered by artificial intelligence. The rise of AI complicates traditional forensic narratives because files can be convincingly manipulated, and proving human intent becomes thornier. Prosecutors, in turn, must demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that the material is what they claim it is, and that the defendant knowingly possessed or shared it. That task will rely on forensic testimony, metadata analysis, and the careful presentation of digital evidence to a jury or judge. The technical complexity of the evidence will likely extend the timeline and require expert witnesses on both sides. The human and institutional fallout extends beyond legal arguments. At the center of the controversy is a network of churches known as Life Church in Indiana, where Pastor Nathan Peternell serves as a lead pastor overseeing multiple campuses. Another key figure in the community is Micah Beckwith, who pastors the Noblesville campus and who also holds public office as Indiana's lieutenant governor. Peternell and Beckwith have collaborated publicly for years, co-hosting a podcast in which they discussed faith, moral concerns, and civic matters. That public partnership, combined with the gravity of the allegations, has amplified the scandal's visibility and intensified questions among parishioners about what leaders knew and what oversight mechanisms were in place. People who relied on these men for guidance now find themselves asking hard questions about leadership, transparency, and the safeguards required to protect vulnerable people within any faith community. To date, neither pastor has issued a public statement addressing the investigation or the criminal charges. The absence of a response has left a vacuum that is now being filled by parishioner testimony, social media conversations, and intense local reporting. Congregants describe a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and anger, emotions common in communities where allegations implicate people perceived as moral authorities. For a church that serves as both a spiritual home and a public institution, the decision about how and when to communicate is fraught. Leaders must weigh legal advice, pastoral responsibility, and the congregation's need for transparency. How the church responds in the coming days, whether through pastoral care for those affected, independent review, or clearer reporting pathways for misconduct, will be watched carefully by members and by observers interested in the broader questions of accountability in religious organizations. Beyond the immediate institutional questions, this case forces us to confront a set of broader societal issues that are already shaping how communities respond to harm in the digital age. At the most immediate level, it highlights how rapidly evolving technology can be turned toward destructive ends. Artificial intelligence, once a tool talked about almost exclusively in terms of convenience or innovation, now plays a troubling role in the creation and manipulation of images. Deep learning techniques can generate or alter photographs so convincingly that distinguishing authentic material from fabrications becomes a technical challenge. When those tools are used to produce sexualized images, particularly ones that mimic or involve minors, the harm is both immediate and lasting. Victims and their families face the emotional fallout of having private, intimate representations weaponized against them, while investigators and courts must grapple with questions about provenance and intent that did not exist a decade ago. That reality changes nearly every aspect of how we think about evidence, responsibility, and prevention. Digital files are no longer simple artifacts whose origins can be inferred from a camera timestamp and a file name. They can be layered, edited, and entirely synthetic. For criminal investigators, this increases the burden of proof, not because the underlying wrongdoing is any less severe, but because proving who created a harmful image, who altered it, and who knowingly shared it now requires deep technical expertise. Metadata analysis, device forensics, and the testimony of digital imaging specialists become central pillars of any prosecutorial case. At the same time, defense teams have legitimate avenues to question chain of custody, authentication procedures, and the meaning of possession in an era where cloud backups and shared accounts blur the line between active custody and passive storage. The technological dimension also shifts some responsibility onto the platforms and services that host or transmit content. Ephemeral messaging apps, private group chats, and social networks were not designed with criminal exploitation in mind, but their features, disappearing messages, private channels, and encrypted transmissions, can be repurposed by users wishing to conceal harmful behavior. This creates a tension between privacy and protection. We must protect free expression and private communications, yet we also need mechanisms that let law enforcement and safety teams detect, report, and remove illegal content quickly and effectively. That balance calls for stronger cooperation between technology companies and investigators, clearer reporting pathways for suspicious material, and, where appropriate, faster, more transparent procedures to take down exploitative content while preserving user privacy as much as possible. Institutional response is the second major concern that emerges from this case. Whether the setting is religious, educational, or corporate, organizations often face the same hard questions when wrongdoing is alleged within their ranks. How do leaders ensure accountability without rushing to judgment? How do they communicate transparently with stakeholders while honoring legal constraints and protecting victims' confidentiality? A robust institutional response has several components: clear reporting channels that are accessible and trusted, independent review processes that can evaluate allegations impartially, and rapid, compassionate care for any victim, including access to trauma-informed counseling and legal assistance. Organizations must also be willing to examine structural flaws that allowed harmful behavior to go undetected. For example, gaps in oversight, inadequate background checks, or cultural tendencies that discourage whistleblowing. A crucial part of that institutional work is transparency. Silence or evasive statements will almost always backfire in the face of serious allegations because they leave space for rumor, speculation, and distrust. Yet transparency must be exercised responsibly. Organizations should provide factual updates about what is known, what steps are being taken, and how they are supporting those harmed, while avoiding the release of sensitive investigative details that could jeopardize legal processes or re-traumatize victims. In practical terms, that looks like regular, measured communication from informed representatives, a publicly available outline of the steps being taken, such as independent audits or temporary administrative leaves, and an explicit pathway for community members to report concerns or request support. Legal clarity and victim-centered care must go hand in hand. The criminal justice system's role is to investigate, to determine accountability, and, where appropriate, to prosecute. But legal action alone is not enough to address the human consequences. Survivors and their families require immediate emotional and practical support, counseling, medical care, legal advocacy, and, when desired, privacy protections from the media. Organizations implicated in such cases need to prioritize resources for those services and to work with local nonprofit and governmental victim support agencies to provide trauma-informed care. That approach recognizes that healing is not purely a legal outcome. It is a long, often nonlinear process that requires community patience, skilled professional intervention, and concrete protections to prevent further harm. This case also underscores the need for preventive measures that are realistic and actionable. Institutions must invest in digital literacy and safety training so that staff, volunteers, and congregants understand how online platforms can be misused and what signs to look for. Policies should be updated to account for modern threats, acceptable use rules for devices, mandatory reporting obligations, regular audits of online groups associated with an institution, and clear boundaries concerning private communications between leaders and vulnerable individuals. Preventive work should extend beyond policy to culture, encouraging a climate where concerns can be raised without fear of retaliation, where transparency is valued over reputation management, and where leaders are held to consistent standards of conduct. Another lesson is the importance of external oversight. Internal reviews can be valuable, but they sometimes lack the perceived independence necessary to restore public confidence. Independent investigations, conducted by parties with no institutional stake in the outcome, can help ensure objectivity and reassure stakeholders that the facts are being evaluated impartially. For religious institutions especially, where spiritual authority can complicate governance, outside reviews, coupled with clear governance reforms, can be a crucial step toward rebuilding trust. The legal process itself will likely be slow and technical, requiring methodical work by prosecutors and defense attorneys alike. Evidence must be authenticated, witnesses will be heard, and forensic experts will be asked to explain what digital traces mean in plain terms. While the courts determine culpability and penalties, the community must manage the more immediate moral and social work of responding to the shock and grief such revelations provoke. That work, consoling, counseling, and rebuilding, will be messy and incremental. It will require acknowledging victim suffering, offering meaningful support, and being transparent about the steps being taken to prevent future harm. At the same time, society owes a careful balance to the accused, due process, the opportunity to mount a defense, and the presumption of innocence until guilt is established in court. This balance is integral to the credibility of the justice system and to public faith in the process. Upholding due process does not diminish the importance of victim support. Rather, it underscores the necessity of a system that is both fair and thorough. Ultimately, this is a test of communal resilience and moral seriousness. The path forward is neither punitive theatrics nor denial and cover-up. It is a combination of legal rigor, compassionate care, institutional reform, and cultural change. Communities must insist on accountability, but they must also commit to doing the difficult work of repair. That includes revisiting policies, investing in prevention, cooperating with authorities, and, perhaps most painfully, recognizing that betrayal can occur in even the most trusted places. For now, the community must continue to wait for the courts to provide clearer answers. Prosecutors will keep building their case, defense lawyers will scrutinize the evidence, and forensic analysts will dig into the digital record. In parallel, church members, neighbors, and local leaders will grapple with the emotional fallout and the practical steps needed for healing. This process may take months or longer, and its outcomes will shape not only lives directly affected, but also the standards by which similar institutions are judged in the future. As developments unfold, it is important for everyone involved to insist on two things: that investigations be conducted thoroughly and professionally, and that the dignity and welfare of potential victims be the central concern at every stage. Transparency, when balanced with legal prudence, should guide institutional communications, and support, when grounded in trauma-informed best practices, should guide pastoral and community responses. We will watch closely as more documents, statements, and court actions become available, and we will relay verified facts as they emerge. Throughout this painful time, the lives affected deserve discretion, careful handling, and the consistent message that truth, safety, and healing are the priorities. If you'd like to stay informed about how this story develops, please subscribe.